Good morning and welcome to the Iowa Core Advocates Network for ELA. This is our third webinar. It is 9 o'clock, so we will start now, and we anticipate that the webinar will last an hour. My name is Lee Belleville. I am an instructional coach with Indianola Community Schools, and I serve on the statewide literacy leadership team. I will be co-leading the webinar with Destiny Eldridge. She is the literacy consultant with the Iowa Department of Education. We collaborate to create these monthly presentations. To begin with, I would like to share a few webinar logistics. First, we would like to ensure everyone is muted to prevent background noise, though we will utilize the chat feature throughout the webinar. If you would like to ask questions or comments, Destiny and I will be monitoring the chat throughout the webinar. Also, as a reminder, the webinar will be recorded and posted on the Core Advocate website. I will point out how to access the site later in the webinar. This allows others who are unable to join us today an opportunity to watch the recordings. We will both turn off our cameras when presenting content to ensure the best possible speed in terms of bandwidth when facilitating the Zooms, and also to focus attention on the information included on the slides. For slide 2, we are going to take a look at the objectives that we would like everyone to keep in mind today. The first one being understanding how to utilize the SAP, or Student Achievement Partners, Common Knowledge and Practice Survey, as a tool for educators to reflect on their instructional practice and understanding of the standards. Second, practice evaluating text complexity and grade band placement. Third, understanding how to utilize the process of evaluating a text for complexity to plan and scaffold instruction. And then last, discuss the dilemma that educators face when curriculum no longer meets the needs of the students and expectations of the Iowa Core. I would like to point out the SAP Common Core Knowledge and Practice Survey and the new Instructional Advocacy Plan. Then, Destiny will lead us into a review regarding the last webinar and the enrichment tasks that you all have completed. So taking a look at the next slide, this is going to actually be an additional resource that comes from the Achieve the Core newsletter, which was sent out yesterday. So this practice survey through SAP is designed for use in your professional learning communities and within your school. It's also meant to spark conversation, identify areas for growth, and offer concrete ways for teams of teachers to continue to align their practice to the shifts. I'm going to go ahead and show you what the survey looks like. If you click on the link, once you have access to that slide deck, you'll be able to access this particular survey. Also, as an additional resource, if you're unsure what the College and Career Ready ELA literacy standards are asking of you, your materials, and your students, then the Unbound Ed grade by grade content guides can help answer your questions. Those are meant to help zero in on what's important and also provide plenty of examples that you could apply in your own classroom. So again, I'm going to click on the link just so you can see visually what this would look like. And these are just resources for you to take a look at later, and you can feel free to explore those independently. If you notice, it also lists an option to subscribe to the newsletter. So you may end up wanting to take a minute to do that as well. That way you can receive any important update. The next piece that I wanted to share with you is an instructional advocacy form. So what we would like you to do is actually take a few minutes to tell us what you're doing with the shared information and the resources obtained through the Iowa Core Advocate Network, ELA specifically, throughout the coming year. While we never share your contact information publicly, if you include something we would like to highlight on social media or in our monthly webinars, we will always reach out to you for permission. Thus far in our webinars, we have been using educator examples from the Indianola Community Schools because I work in district. And therefore, I have knowledge of what is occurring as well as some teacher connections. But we would really like to highlight other work that is happening in districts across the state. And we plan to use this feedback on this particular form as a means to identify that important work that you are doing. So I'm going to go ahead and again, just access the form so you can see what this looks like. And you will be able to take some time after the webinar today to share out information using this particular form that goes directly to our Iowa Core Advocate Network.
And Lee, I would add one thing.
Yes.
I would say that you can utilize this form as well as many times and as often as necessary to sort of report what you're doing. So it's not sort of a one-time thing. Instead, you would be doing it throughout the year as information and really the way that you're utilizing the resources progresses.
That's a good point. And also just to build off of that, in terms of the SAP Achieve the Core form that we had shared with all of you previously, they actually would like you to do that as well. So even if you fill out and you're talking about things that you're doing in your district or your state in terms of advocacy, you can actually fill that form out again as well. So I wanted to kind of point that out. Okay, we are going to move into a review from October 10th, 2017 during our last webinar, and Destiny is going to go ahead and take the lead and share her screen at this point.
All right, sorry, I needed to unmute myself. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So our review from the last webinar, we have been focusing on the first shift demanded by the Common Core State Standards and the Iowa Core for ELA literacy, and we're focusing on complexity, which is regular practice with complex text and its academic language. Let's see here. We discussed last time, and I almost said last week, but it's been quite a few weeks since then, on the last webinar, what makes a text complex? And if you remember, we went into the 3 different factors of text complexity, which include the quantitative scale, the qualitative measures, and then also the reader and task. In this webinar in particular, we are going to delve deeper into those qualitative measures and then also the reader and task portion of evaluating a text complexity. Evaluating text complexity really is the best way to consider how to support students in reading complex text and in planning what tasks to do and when. And so what do students do with what they know and should be able to do? And so that's one key component of analyzing a text for complexity, in addition to ensuring that you're using an appropriate level. Last time we went through these different segments, portions that we kind of looked at the different, the layers of meaning, purpose, complexity, concept complexity under meaning, knowledge, language, and structure. One thing that I am adding as a resource is over here in your bottom right-hand corner, and this is a document that goes through and explains really what each one of these features entail, and it's a companion to the qualitative dimension scale. So that is new over here in green if you're interested in looking at that following the meeting. Okay, so now we're going to go into the enrichment tasks that we invited you to complete prior to this week. And specifically for this one, I wanted to start off by addressing a question that came in from the field, and that was specific to how do I think about text complexity if I teach grades K through 2? Because the examples that we're providing really have been 3-12, and specifically a middle school example within this enrichment task. So what I want you to remember is that there's no demand for text complexity until second graders are solid readers, meaning that they are decoding with automaticity and reading fluently at grade level. And so that really has to stay the focus for teachers. The whole pyramid of school success has a really shaky foundation. So in the second grade, the complexity band begins, and students need to be reading text in the lower part of the grades 2 and 3 band. But keep in mind that that doesn't mean that all text should be read in this band. Less complex text can be used to really scaffold and also encourage students with their independent reading. The next piece is that in kindergarten, first and second grade, really they should be including educators within their instructional practice read alouds, and specifically read aloud texts. And these texts should be at least 2 years above grade level of students at that complexity measure. And so the other question that came up was where to find a sample K2 text for complexity analysis. So if you are interested in doing that, while Student Achievement Partners doesn't have an activity for grades 1 through 2 that's exactly the same as the Great Fire Instructional Practice Guide activity that we invited you to complete for this particular webinar, I can point you to a few different resources that are available on Achieve the Core. And really the best asset on Student Achievement Partners and Achieve the Core website is going to be their K2 Read Aloud project, and they have some new project sets that are made around 90 different topics. And they did share with me a couple weeks ago some of those drafts, which I've offered to you, and they live right now within my Google Drive. And so I don't believe they're up on the site yet, but you can delve into those if you so choose. The second place would be to look at within the instructional practice tools, the grade 2 example. So if you click on the building knowledge through close reading module, there's going to be a grade 2 lesson and facilitator resources that includes a text complexity workup. And then finally, on the ELA literacy lessons page, you can use the filters on the left-hand side to filter for grades 1 and 2. And you might be able to use one of these examples, although some of them do not have the associated text immediately available, keeping that in mind. Lastly, an additional resource that is offered through the Instructional Practice Guide coaching tool are activities for the core action number 1 around foundational skills. And so you can go into this, and these offer activities and keys to support learning around instruction and materials that systematically provide all students with the opportunities to master foundational skills. Okay. So now we're going to move into the tasks that you all completed for today. I did ask that you had access to this enrichment task so that we're able to go into the rubric and so on. And what I would ask of you to do for the purpose of our conversation today is to go through and label on the rubric at the top for the complexity descriptors, assign a 4 to the exceedingly complex column, a 3 for the very complex, a 2 for the moderately complex, and a 1 for the slightly complex. And then we will be utilizing the chat feature to discuss what you all decided and assigned to each one of these. So I'm going to go into the enrichment task. And if we go through, some of you may have already found the key to this activity, which is totally fine, but we are going to go through and review it so that everyone has an opportunity to discuss what they chose to do and so on. So we will begin by looking at the quantitative measure, which is really the number measure. And they provided for us the Flesch Kincaid measure and also the Luxile. And so with that said, that placed us within which band. So I would ask you now to use the chat feature to tell me, it's a pretty simple question, but where did you place those two numbers within figure 1? Let me go over here to the chat. Okay, so we have one in the 9 to 10 range. Okay. Anybody else? Okay, we have 6th to 8th grade. Okay, good. Lexile 6 to 8. Okay. So under Flesch Kincaid, the number 9 is going to fall between the 6 to 8 and the 9 to 10. And then underneath the Lexile framework, it's going to fall between 4th to 5th and then between the 6th to 8th. And so based on the quantitative measures, where did you decide which grade band would you recommend placing this excerpt if you use the chat feature? And let's see here. Okay, 6 to 8, 6 to 8. So we're having consensus around 6 to 8. Absolutely. That makes the most sense. Okay. So that's one measure. So as we know, we need to go into the qualitative measures as well, because we don't want to just go by what a computer says it is. Now we need to go in and really use our professional judgment and go through the qualitative analysis. And so we're going to look at the rubric. And specifically, we'll go ahead and start with the purpose. And so I would encourage you within the chat to put down the number that correlates with the column that you would choose for the purpose. Okay, so we have a number 2. Does everyone agree with the number 2? Okay, agreed? Okay. Okay. So for those of you who've chosen number 2, if you would like to either type into chat or you can unmute yourself to share, why did you choose moderately complex? Okay, purpose is not explicitly stated. However, there is a focus topic. Okay. Okay. I think that that's fair. Really, you know, as I read through this particular excerpt from the text, it's a pretty straightforward text to practice with for the first time. And so I think that it really is easy to identify the purpose in this instance, which is to maybe build some background knowledge around the Great Fire and specifically some of the causes and catalysts for the Great Fire. Okay, excellent. So let's move on to structure. So the structure here is we're really going to consider the connections between ideas, implicit, explicit, the organization of the text. Is it in chronological order? Is it sequential? Please use the chat to put down the number that correlates with the column that you chose for this section. Okay, we have a number 2. And maybe as you put in your number, maybe write a quick justification for maybe why you chose number 2. And we'll allow some think time for some other participants to put in a number. And I would also encourage us that as we go through this, a really important thing to do when we are looking at assigning a number or at least a level, we also really want to consider the evidence that we would use to support that rationale, because that evidence is going to become very helpful in some of the next steps where we identify really the purpose and task to use with this, and to identify areas of most complexity so that we could put in some scaffolds for students as they approach a text as well. So I think we're going to go with the number 2. I'm not going to dwell on this for too long. I would say that looking at, so that you know, there is a key on the Student Achievement Partner site. They actually assigned it as slightly complex. And so they decided that the connections between ideas, processes, or events are explicit and clear, and the organization of text is clear, chronological, or easy to predict. And so as I look at Michelle's response, she says that the connections are there, but they are a bit subtle. So I would agree with that, because maybe at a number 2 level, some students might be looking for some of those signposts and some of those sequential or chronological words. Okay, so let's move on to language features. Please tell me where you think that this text fell in that level. And you may not choose all 3 underneath that. Maybe there's only 1 or 2 that stand out here, and that's okay. Okay, so we have between a 1 to 2. So what's really the difference? Thank you. Okay, we're seeing 2, 2. What would move it to a 2 from a 1? Because if we looked at number 1, how is it different to move into a 2? The key does say 2 for sentence structure. So we're thinking maybe, okay, Michelle says conventionality, maybe 1. It's explicit, literal, straightforward, absolutely. Okay, Cindy is saying the sentence structures is more complex than just conversation, absolutely. I would agree with that. What about vocabulary? A 1 to 2? Yeah, there's some words in here that might be difficult for this grade band. Some words that I pulled out maybe as some evidence: ornately, proclaimed, flammable, interspersed. They do say jerry built, but they offer that definition, right? So I think that that does indeed put us into the moderately complex for vocabulary. Mostly it's familiar, but there are some things that might be unfamiliar. Yep, good. And so the question up here is, how many unfamiliar words move it to a 2? What's some of your thinking out there? Do you think there's a specific number, or what would be the difference? 5 or more? Okay. More than a handful, I like it. All right. Yeah, I mean, I think that we have to use our judgment and knowing our students and knowing who they are and their skills and where they are to really make that decision. But I think that we could all agree, looking at this, that we could probably put some supports in place to help students understand some of those vocabulary terms. So we would focus on that when we're thinking of scaffolding. So let's go into the final section, which is knowledge demands. Okay, and so for knowledge demands, what I would like us to consider is really going to be subject matter and then the intertextuality. What are the numbers that you chose for this one? Seems pretty straightforward, okay? So we have a 1. Would anyone like to add? Everyday practical knowledge, simple concrete ideas. Let's look at how it differs between a 2 and a 1. Okay, so Amy, she believes that it's a 1. So I will tell you in the key that, okay, so Lisa says a number 2 for subject matter. In the key it says 2 under subject matter. So if we were to read that, everyday practical knowledge and some discipline-specific content knowledge, both simple and more complicated, maybe some abstract ideas. So again, I think it could waver between the 1 and the 2. We're looking here, okay, so what is discipline-specific knowledge? Does anyone want to take a stab at that one? So discipline-specific knowledge, oh, from this particular passage, good question. For those of you who chose the 2, did you feel that there was discipline-specific knowledge? And so if we're thinking of this through the lens of maybe a social studies text, if we're looking at a historical event, what would be some specific knowledge that students might need to know in order to understand this text? Right, the time period, absolutely, the 1800s. Okay. And probably understanding that things weren't built in that time the way that they are today. The financial situation's excellent, very good. Okay. Structures of cities, yes, social and economical, excellent. Those are great examples. Okay, so again, this evidence would help us and will help us as we consider on what we'd like to focus using this text and then how to scaffold that instruction. The last thing that Lisa offered is resources available at the time period, which are much different than now. And so that might help us to understand why this happened and maybe ideas for preventing it in the future. Okay, depending on what the task is that we do with this text. Okay, excellent. Hopefully this was a fairly painless activity. And so let's see here, we have one more from Michelle. I can still lean towards a 1. Text specifically lays those concepts out. I would agree with that as well. Okay. And definitely for the intertextuality, we don't really have allusions to other texts. And so that keeps it fairly easy as well. But I think the subject matter could be somewhere between a 1 and a 2. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and move on. We want to keep going because we only have an hour. So I'm going to take us back to our PowerPoint. And what I'd like for us to look at next is, I did offer in here where you can find the key for the activity if you'd like to go through that and do it with people within your own setting. Also, there's another resource. We offered in this one the informational qualitative rubric. If you go to this link here, you'll find one for literary texts. And so that will be useful when you are looking at those literary ones. Okay, so now we're going to move into the next portion, which is really going to be central to the rest of our discussion today. And it's also going to move into our December webinar as well. We're going to look at the reader and task. Please keep in mind that just for the structure of this webinar, reader and task is coming after we did the qualitative and quantitative analysis, but really these can all be done together simultaneously. The reader and task piece of this is around what the instructor does with the text to help students read and understand it. Okay, so we're going to begin by looking at posing a question to you. And let me get in here to where my notes are. Really considering where do we want students to go? And here's some questions to consider when planning tasks to do with a particular text. What was your light bulb moment as the educator when reading a portion of the text on which you're going to focus, or what would you want students to take away or experience from this excerpt? And so those are two questions that can really help guide the focus on which you're going to place on this particular text. An additional resource that I do include is a close reading activity with the Great Fire. This resource offers a close reading activity with a different excerpt from the same text, which we just analyzed. A review of this activity exemplifies on which part the instructor chose to focus, as well as the use of text-dependent questions that are used to scaffold instruction. Okay, so our next step would be, where do we want students to go? And then how do we help our students to find their way there? And this is really important because there's a rule to this. We cannot take it away from them. Okay, so what that means is we don't want to steal students' light bulbs. So for example, we don't want to tell them the meaning of the passage. Instead, we want to support them in discovering that light bulb moment for themselves through thoughtful questions and tasks. And then along the way, we have to consider, where will students struggle in this path to that light bulb? And that's really where we become strategic with our instruction and the supports we put in place for students. Here is a quote that I wanted to share with you that comes from Appendix A regarding reader and task considerations. Students who struggle greatly to read text within or even below their text complexity level must be given the support needed to enable them to read at an appropriate level of complexity. Even many students on course for college and career readiness are likely to need scaffolding as they master higher levels of text complexity. So it's not just our lowest, lower learners. It's for everyone all along the spectrum. Okay, so the next consideration when you're thinking of the reader and task is to really think about qualitatively which elements of the text require the most scaffolding for student access. We know that to become college and career ready, students need to learn how to engage with grade level appropriate complex text on a regular basis. Simply assigning complex text to students and expecting that they can or should understand it on their own is simply not enough. Really, as you're going through and doing that complexity analysis, you want to take note of what is complex within the text so you can concentrate on working with students on those particular parts of the text. And doing so will grow the student's toolbox so that they have their ability to really tap into their own skill set to comprehend different texts across all content areas. Some questions to consider when thinking about those elements that require the most student access would be, and these are questions we pose to you all, what challenges do you expect students would encounter in accessing this text independently? And secondly, what scaffolding and supports would students need to access this? And then again, using the evidence from your analysis to really help drive some of that analysis. And then the last thing is, once I have identified the big idea and elements of complexity, how do I plan for instruction? So in December, we're going to focus more on writing text-dependent questions that could help unpack features of text complexity. And text-dependent questions can really be used to inspire deeper thinking and specifically to help students move through a text. And this creates an opportunity to understand where students have confusions or misunderstandings for the teacher as well. So coming up, we are going to focus on text-dependent tasks and questions. Really, the focus of our enrichment task from the last webinar was to focus on really being able to understand and work with the rubric to figure out if the text is complex enough and maybe some considerations for what to do with it. So for those of you who might be ready to move into tackling the writing of text-dependent questions, this slide does provide resources to help with that process. And so if you want to go into these, please feel free to do so. We will go into these in more detail in the future, specifically in December and on. And then I want to note one last thing. The Lexile by Chapter Guides is a really useful tool to help decide on which sections of a text to focus for close reading while you're keeping the purpose in mind. So that's why I included that one there. So that's kind of a fun one to look at for some of those traditional texts that many people use within their ELA classrooms, but it can help you decide on your focus because of the complexity piece and so on. So now I'm going to go ahead and pass this over. I think we have one question in chat. Okay, so we don't have a question, but we do have our Padlet link, because what I would like to do is give you 1 minute, 1 to 2 minutes to go in now into Padlet. And again, it is in the chat right now. And I would like for you to answer one or both of these questions. How did this process with the sample text increase your understanding of the importance of text complexity? And or in what ways would measuring a text using the rubric better prepare a teacher to engage students in the text? Okay, so we'll start counting out. Take about 2 minutes to go in and reflect within that Padlet. Okay, so one important thing that's really coming out is text complexity goes beyond prescribed levels. That's absolutely true. Okay, and then the other piece that some people are offering to us, the rubric helps you pinpoint where to place the scaffolds for students who might need to learn them. Excellent. Please continue to fill that in. We will keep moving along, but we will have this accessible for folks who are not on the live webinar. We encourage you to add to this Padlet as well for use later on. Okay, with that, I'd like to hand it over to Lee, and you can begin sharing your screen.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and pick up where we left off. So what we started with during the last webinar is talking about the IPG, the Instructional Practice Guide, and we did show a segment previously. And what we would like to do now is actually highlight a couple of different segments that relate specifically to addressing task consideration and supports. So to provide background for anyone who may not have been on our call last time, our grade 8 ELA teacher, Michelle Meisder, and one of our instructional coaches, Lisa Butler-Masuya, granted permission for this video of a coaching conversation to be recorded and shared with others for educational purposes. The two texts that Michelle is reflecting on are the poem Paul Revere's Ride by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow and primary source documents that include letters Paul Revere sends out after his ride. The texts are integrated during the middle of a unit on the American Revolution, where students are engaged in a research project on a patriot of the Revolution. These texts were chosen to engage learners in the analysis and the credibility of sources. During the October webinar, we viewed the segment that showed the teacher and coach evaluating the texts used in the lesson for complexity, because that was our focus at that point. Today, we will view segments that highlight reader and task. The first segment discusses the teacher's desire to better engage learners and a shift from a passive listening activity to a close reading of the text complexity. We will explore strategies further to assist students in accessing complex text with the enrichment strategies today. The last segment that you will see, because these are connected in one clip, will show, actually begins the discussion of the task itself.
Again, we're just on the part about the lesson is that reading, writing, or speaking? Do you feel like there's some areas of the lesson that could be enhanced by a little bit more, less teacher talk and more student reading, writing, or?
I'm thinking, I've done this in the past where I've read it out loud so they can listen to it, but if there's a way, I'm trying to figure out what's a better way to do this because it's a very long poem, and I know that they will tune out after a while. That's just how students are, and I want to find a better way to give them the text besides just either hear silently read or just listen to me read.
So this is more about the tasks that they do with it, and again, thinking about those tasks could help us think of ways in which they should interact with it prior to the task too. So you kind of mentioned the tasks. Let's think about it in this terms. Does the task ask the students to attend to the structures and these are actually kind of big deals here, all four of these in one question, but basically in the core, most standards are either related to the structure of the text, the big ideas and concepts, or the details. In our ratings here, they start to give us, this is just yes, no, but they start to give us ratings. 4, most questions and tasks return students to the text to build understanding. 3, many questions and tasks return the students to the text to build understanding. 2, few questions return the students. And then 1, the questions and tasks that the kids can do without even ever looking back at this, type of a thing. So let's think a little deeper about your tasks and what you're having to do with the text. What would your response be to this, I guess, evaluation?
Well, since they are having to pull out the key ideas of things that are happening in it, I would say it would probably be maybe a 3.
Okay.
I think that sometimes they can probably go, I know how the beginning of the story, I know the end of the story, I can figure those ones out. But this middle portion here would be where they really need to pull out specific things. But especially at the end when they write me that argumentative paper, that's the end goal. I'm asking them to also cite specific evidence of why this poem should be used as a historical document. And so they're going to have to pull out and compare these two and pull out those kind of reasonings. And they could not do that if they did not have the tasks or texts in front of them.
And a clarifying question, again, I think it might play into how they interact with the text. Do students, are they made aware at the very beginning of this lesson that that's the end result, that as they're listening or reading, that they should be thinking about, or they're going to be asked to write about, that essential question, or does that come after the fact?
Yes, I do tell them that, just so that they're aware of here's why we're doing this. Okay. We're already looking at why are certain patriots of the American Revolution, why are they heroes and why are they leaders? And this is just kind of adding to that as well. Okay. Especially with our talks, and right now it's only been talks about what is a good source, what isn't a good source. And I think that this can add to it as well with their understanding, so that way they can see that just because it's a published document, just because it was 100 years ago, doesn't mean that it is a good document.
Right.
At this point, I would like to highlight, if you look on the right-hand side of your screen, there is an additional resource. This is actually the October 2017 SAP Core Advocate webinar, and it's entitled, Who's Doing the Work? Shifting the Lift in ELA and Literacy. It actually addresses how much work are you leaving to your students. Often teachers engage in well-intentioned practices that take that cognitive load out of the students' hands. So with this particular webinar, you can hear from fellow educators on instructional practices and concrete strategies that teachers can use to leverage the amount of time that students are reading, writing, talking, and thinking. I also wanted to remind everyone that you can subscribe to the Iowa Core Advocate YouTube channel, which is actually what we're using to house all of the webinar videos and other videos included. I will also go ahead and demonstrate how to find our channel. So when you first go to the YouTube channel, and I'm going to go ahead and type in YouTube. What you will need to do is that if you do not already have a YouTube account, then you will want to click the sign in the upper right-hand corner. It will give you that option. If you already have a Google ID through Gmail or Google+, then you can simply sign into YouTube with that username and password that you've already used. Also, signing in with a Google ID on the YouTube's homepage will automatically register you for your YouTube account and then link that YouTube sign-in to your Google account. Otherwise, you can select Create Account, which will be another option using a different email address. Once you registered, then you will be able to subscribe to the channel. So to do so, you're going to actually, in the search bar, you will type in Iowa Core Advocates. And then you'll notice that the image comes up. And I am actually already subscribed, but if you are not subscribed, it will give you the option to do so. So if you click here, the option will be over on the right-hand side. You'll notice that we already have 7 subscribers, so we're happy that several of you have found this channel already. And we just want to ensure that all of our members know how to access and subscribe to the YouTube channel as well. You'll also be able to access all of our materials utilizing the Iowa Core website. And you will notice, we've actually shared this previously, but in the slide deck that you're going to be receiving, we will also have this linked again for you. So then you can access the sites.google.com and then Iowa Core Advocates. And this is the home page. So you'll notice that there is ELA literacy and there's also mathematics. So if you click on the ELA literacy tab, then you will be able to find the slide deck and those webinar videos located on this page as well. So Destiny will keep this updated and all of those webinar recordings and slide decks are available to you. So for the next piece, I am going to go ahead and move to the enrichment task. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to share several resources with you to explore further, such as an aligned blog on achievethecore.org and a webinar to view as an enrichment task before the next meeting. So on the next slide, you'll notice that there is a linked Strategies to Scaffold Instruction of Standards-Aligned Complex Texts. What I would like you to do is kind of think about what are some research-based strategies that you have either read about or have tried in the classroom and found to be effective. If everyone could just share an idea in the chat about how you think students can be supported to access complex text. Just take a minute to go ahead and record your thoughts.
So this is good. So we've got pre-teach important vocabulary, visuals, graphic organizers, notice and note signposts, stances and strategies. Excellent.
Visuals was mentioned as well.
Yep. Okay.
Okay, so these are all excellent ideas. There are 4 that are actually highlighted in this particular blog. And the first one would be support vocabulary, use deliberate annotation, use questions as planned scaffolds, and allow time for reflection and discussion. So those strategies are included in the article that's linked. And what you can do is following the webinar, you'll be able to access that article using that link to read more information about each of those particular strategies. On the next piece, for the enrichment task, I listed for the first bullet point aligned blog. That's where you're reading that article that we began discussing. On the second link, you'll notice that it says supporting all Learners in Accessing Complex Text, the 2017 February webinar. So what we're going to do is we're going to watch that webinar outside of this particular one as your enrichment task, and you will answer 4 questions that are posted to this 11-7-17 Padlet for today. So I'll click on that so you can take a look at what that looks like. And you will be able to access those 4 questions, and after you watch the webinar or you read through the actual slide deck, then you can think about, why is regular practice with complex text and its academic language important? What can prevent teachers from using complex text with students? Which strategy do you want to try in your own classroom and or share with other teachers? And then there is a PDF that's available to offer additional strategies. I actually included that link right onto the Padlet for you, but I wanted to show you that all of these pieces are in the same place. So when you click this link, I'm going to show you how to navigate this particular part. Here is the video of the webinar that you'll watch. Then when you click presentation, you can access the full slide deck that they have there. And then under resources, this is where I actually retrieved that PDF file that I linked to the Padlet. And I just like this one because it has a lot of different strategies that are listed that you can read through on your own and take a look at in addition to what you've read in that previous blog. Then you'll notice at the bottom, this is an optional assignment, but if you would like to just try this out, you'll notice that it's fairly easy to navigate, and it's just a 1 page here. What makes this text complex? What you can do is use this guide to support the analysis of a text for complexity. So you could choose to do so for either a read aloud for grades K2 or for grades 2 through 12. So I'll show you what this looks like. This would give you an opportunity to practice this. And then of course, if you have any of, I'm going to try to refresh here. If you have success with this and you would like to tweet that out, then you could certainly do so, or you can share it with one of us, and we may even end up sharing that in the future webinar to show what your process was and to talk through that. So we have what makes this read aloud complex, quantitative, qualitative features, reader and task, and it's a 1 page here. But that would allow you an opportunity to practice that and think about that question, what makes this text complex? So for the next piece, we have a segment of the webinar where we wanted to talk to all of you about that discussion that we've been having about that importance of text complexity and alignment to the core. This particular piece addresses possible steps when curriculum doesn't meet student needs and expectations of the Iowa core.
And Lee, I would just say that we know that we need a little bit of time for this segment. So what I suggest we do is we continue going with this, and we are recording. And so for those of you who have to get off at 10 o'clock, I anticipate this going over by maybe 5 to 10 minutes. But we'll go ahead and move through with it. And then for those of you who need to come back and watch the end of the recording, we invite you.
Absolutely. And we will announce our next guest speaker too, so you might want to tune back in. So we have, for this particular segment, Lisa Potts joined us last time from edreports.org to discuss that counter narrative that one would use dialogically with others regarding the importance of using complex text with all students. In fact, we had invited Lisa to share her thoughts relating to a challenge posed by one of you. And that question was, what do we say when others do not feel that all students can access complex text? So we do feel that that previous webinar I just showed you as an enrichment task by Achieve the Core is going to help you and assist you in providing guidance as you move forward. The interview that I'm going to play now is with our 6th grade teacher, Christy Dusenberry, and she begins with sharing implications when materials do not offer appropriate levels of complexity. What we would like all of you to think about is the following question. And I know Destiny is also going to link this in the chat for the Padlet. So you can actually have that, click on that, and you can have that up off to the side on a different tab. And that way you can think about that while you're listening and watching. So be prepared to share your thoughts about what are the advantages that Christy observes now that she is offering appropriate complex text to her students. What are the advantages Christy observes now that she's offering appropriate complex text to her students? So I'm going to play the first segment and then Please go ahead and share your response.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us today. We adopted new curriculum in 6th grade English Language Arts this year. Our process for doing so, after meeting with the 6th grade Language Arts team, our principal, and our curriculum director, was to utilize edreports.org to identify materials that are aligned to the core, and then based on those results, and after researching other resources that had not been reviewed yet, your 6th grade team selected the materials that would best fit the needs of our students and our district. Throughout this process of adoption, and based on your observations so far, why do you feel that materials matter?
Well, when we were first starting discussions about curriculum, it was really primarily a concern about text complexity. And we were looking at what the kids were currently using, and we were having to supplement a lot. So we were spending a lot of our time pulling in additional resources to help support the core standards that we needed to address. And so then, of course, what happened by doing that is we ended up with sort of a disjointed lesson structure because we had some stuff from the curriculum, some that we had brought in, and we just didn't feel like it was what was best for kids. And then we especially felt that it was not fair to them to have the primary materials they were using being below grade level or even just at grade level, because then when they got to their standardized tests, it was very overwhelming. And we then felt bad because we felt like we didn't prepare them as well as we could have. And so the quality of the materials was really the driving force. One of the things we had a special difficulty with our prior curriculum was that there weren't paired texts of literary and informational that we could pull them together and have them do deep thinking about both. And in addition to that, we were struggling to get complex texts that really did challenge all students. And so this curriculum has been doing a really great job of having the kids close read texts, especially informational texts, over and over with different purposes each time. And they're building their confidence in reading because they're able to tackle these difficult texts and feel good about it. So that was another driving force.
What other strengths?
Okay, so what I would like you to do is take just a minute to record your thoughts about the question in the Padlet. What are the advantages Christy observes now that she is offering appropriate complex text to her students? And then I will have Destiny read off a couple of those responses.
Okay, so it looks like more confident readers and promoting deeper thinking. Absolutely. Yep, the key piece here really is that building of confident readers, so then they have the willingness to really tackle those complex texts, and then which will enable them to hopefully develop their stamina in reading those texts as well.
Wonderful. Thank you, Destiny. So for the next segment, please think about the following question. What are the components of instructional practice that lead to increased student learning? And then I will play this segment, and then I'll pause the video again, and we'll take time to reflect using the Padlet.
Another driving force.
What other strengths have you observed so far in relation to the materials and student tasks?
A lot of them. We chose the EL curriculum, and we've been so happy with it because of course, the level of the text and the complexity of it has been what we were looking for. But in addition to that, it's scripted in a way that makes sure that each language arts teacher is using common language. It has a lot more rigor when it comes to academic vocabulary. And so we've really enjoyed having the kids learn and tackle those academic vocab words more than we have ever done at the 6th grade level. Their writing, their quality of their formal writing is, we feel, probably in October, where in the past our students maybe have not reached till the end of the year. And it's been a challenge because we've had to really backfill with some skills that they didn't come prepared with. But they've risen to the occasion is what we're seeing. That just because the curriculum is more difficult, it has had the opposite effect. They have not shut down because of that. They're actually more engaged because it is difficult. And they're having success with their writing. And I think the biggest thing for us when it comes to a tangible difference is that all language arts teachers have expressed that we know our students and their strengths and weaknesses as it pertains to the standards more than we ever have, and especially this time of year, because most of the classroom work and the tests are constructed response. So they're responding with comprehension to the novels we're reading in constructed response. They're then moving into responding in constructed response with some critical thinking of those texts that they're close reading and having to find elements in that, compare and contrast them with elements in their novel and elements in other literary texts. And then each module wraps up with culminating writing project. And so because they're doing so much constructed response, and because of the way the curriculum sets up many small group discussions, we just know where they are. We know which ones struggle with which skills. We know what they're understanding and what they're not understanding. Our previous curriculum had primarily the end of unit assessments were selected response. And so if they got it right, did they really understand why they got it right? We weren't sure. And if they missed it, we didn't really understand why. Seeing their constructed response, listening to so much conversation in the classroom, has just given us a better understanding of each student individually. One thing we've noticed is that the quality of our materials has really provided equitable education opportunities for all of our students. The way it's written, there's really relevant supports put in place through the curriculum that we scaffold the more difficult text, we scaffold the more difficult activities. The curriculum builds in heterogeneous triads that the kids work in. So this automatically provides some discussion support for some of our kids, maybe the EL kids who are struggling readers or reluctant readers. They're paired with students that are going to challenge them and support them. I would just say one of the concerns when we were looking at this curriculum is that it did have difficult texts. It is far above where we were before. And there was some concern of whether or not our struggling or reluctant readers would be overwhelmed by that. And would we be able to adequately teach the skills with such difficult text? And we weren't sure, we were hoping, but what we've seen already is that those kids have really risen to the occasion. Supports that the curriculum puts in place and that the materials provide. We're often provided with a worksheet that the kids would fill out and a scaffolded version of that same worksheet. And so that really helps us as teachers see where do we need to support those students. And the papers look the same. They just have a couple of things filled in. They have some sentence starters. And so the kids don't feel like they're getting something different. It doesn't stand out, but they're getting that extra support. And so we really believe that those kids are experiencing very rich opportunities regardless of whether they're way above grade level or far below.
So what we would like you to do is take just a minute. I know several of you have already been posting. What are the components of instructional practice that lead to increased student learning? And then Destiny can read off a couple of the comments that you've posted already.
Okay, so a couple is offering constructed response with opportunities for culminating writing activity. Okay, we have some in chat. We have common language, academic vocabulary, formal writing, knowing your students and their strengths and weaknesses through the constructed response, those rich classroom discussions, quality materials and complex texts, collaboration and scaffolded materials. Okay, constructed responses. Go ahead.
Okay, no, that's wonderful. You can all just continue adding to that, because remember, others that are going to view this later will be able to take a look at your thoughts and add their own. So that's always going to be there for you. In the interest of time, we're not going to watch all of the final segment, but we will play part of it as her final thoughts lead us into our next resources. If you would like to watch the full video later, it is available in the slide deck and shared on that YouTube channel following the webinar. So I'll go ahead and play this last section.
What recommendations would you make to other teachers, coaches, and administrators when considering new curriculum?
Well, I would say that because we were experiencing the curriculum on a daily basis with the kids, we were able to see where the frustrations really were, both for the students and for us. And so I guess my advice would be, we were so thrilled to be able to be part of the choosing of the curriculum, because it made us feel empowered to choose what we really felt we could teach and what the kids needed the most. And it has been a completely different experience than if someone had just said, here's your new curriculum. And it's been a lot of work, but because we have so much ownership in that process, and because we really believe in what the curriculum is providing, all of us are willing to put in that extra work because we see the benefit. So I would say involve teachers, listen to their voice, help them feel that they had a significant part in choosing that curriculum so that there's buy-in when it comes time to implement it. I would also really consider always what's happening in the classroom and where's the gap between that and the standardized assessments that the kids are expected to take, so that the teachers are not feeling like we're not preparing the kids. And so, yes, maybe the curriculum on a daily basis is going to be a bit more challenging, a bit more difficult for some students. But if that's what we're expecting them to do in the end, I think we need to be willing to build the scaffolds in and help them to be successful with more challenging material.
So Christy just mentioned that they identified a gap in the previous curriculum. We do know that many teachers are faced with the same challenge that Christy's ELA team was faced with last year. And the resources that we're sharing through achievethecore.org can provide the guidance that you need to move forward. Also, edreports.org can be utilized to assist districts with vetting materials and determining alignment to the core. The materials that were selected by Christy's team had been reviewed by edreports.org to ensure alignment. We as Iowa Core advocates, like edreports.org, are concerned with instructional materials being aligned to core. However, we don't promote any particular curriculum or set of materials. Rather, what we do promote is districts in making great choices for all of our student needs and leading with standards and rigor alignment. We all agree and highly encourage making decisions based on a team's actual implementation needs and what they will actually do in terms of fidelity of implementation. As Lisa Potts shared with us, best practice is best practice, and anything that promotes standards and what's best for kids is what we are excited about. If you've identified a gap and your district cannot adopt a new curriculum at this point, you are not alone, and OERs could be used as a supplement. However, it's also important to note that there are still costs associated with OERs, and that the anchor texts would need to be purchased for students, and the teachers in this case also purchase binded copies of the teacher guides. The top priority is always to ensure alignment and then determine which materials are the right fit for your particular district. So on that note, I'm going to slide over to OERs, and I just listed these and Destiny, and we included these on the slide for your reference. So we realized that some of you will be kind of taking a look at new materials where you might be in a place to move forward now, whereas others may not. So these particular resources can help to support you. The next slide also includes specifically more for curriculum directors and coaches, but these additional resources have been provided for all of you to assist you in moving forward for those that are possibly considering new curriculum. In the spring, after we've covered all of the shifts in depth during our webinars, then we can return to this particular piece and return to instructional materials discussion and explore some of these further. So this is just for those that might need this and want to go ahead and explore this. We're reminding everyone to tweet out at Iowa Core Advocates and learn together and share your ideas. We also have the feedback form, as we typically have offered with our different webinars. We want you to take a few minutes to complete this, and this could actually be done following your enrichment tasks that you complete. We have been using your feedback to guide our webinars, providing information based on those challenges and questions that all of you pose. I would really like to emphasize at this point the importance of your feedback to us. It's provided us with ideas to narrow our focus during the previous webinars. We did not receive any feedback from the October webinar. So this is actually an opportunity for you to share your ideas. So for example, who would you like us to invite to speak in the spring regarding a particular topic? Or are there still ideas or areas that you have that you would like to have some additional resources or even guidance specific to your district? So always thinking about, chances are if you are finding a piece that might be challenging for you, then others are as well. So we'll continue to plan the webinars for next semester based on your feedback. And this will actually lead us into introducing our next speaker for December. And this is Brandon Abben. And we are kind of circling back to that webinar that you're going to be watching for enrichment this month. Achieve the Core actually stated on the page of that webinar this particular quote. Research tells us that students' ability to work with complex text is the most important factor in college and career readiness in reading. Challenges arise for teachers when students struggle to engage with complex text in their classes. So based on the feedback that we received from our members previously in September, they would like to hear more about college and career readiness. So questions were posed such as, what does it mean to be college and career ready? How do we define college and career readiness? What are the expectations for students and the challenges our graduates are facing at the college level, or even in terms of entrance exams? Therefore, in response to the feedback and questions posed, we have invited the speaker Brandon Abden of College Board, and he is going to volunteer his time and share his insights live with us in December. So the date for our next webinar is going to be on Tuesday, December 12th. It will take place from 9 to 10 a.m. Central Standard Time, and a reminder email will be sent in advance with the Zoom link.
And I do want to say one thing, that that December 12th date has been changed from the original one a week before due to Brandon's schedule. And he really wanted to be live and in person to engage with us. And so we did change it to December 12th. So please make note of that on your calendar.
Okay, so Destiny is going to just share quickly with you the network resources.
Yep, so these are the same slides that we include on each webinar. You'll be able to go through, and essentially this is for the Iowa Core Advocate website. Some more resources that you can find for literacy on iowacore.gov, and also if you'd like to sign up to receive literacy news you can use. Okay, and then this is the Student Achievement Partners Core Advocate Network, which is more at the national level, if you're interested in signing up to join their network as well.
Okay, we want to thank everyone for staying on the webinar, and we will post this as well as the slide deck for all of you, and we look forward to seeing you in December.
Yes, thank you so much. And while we apologize for going over, it's important information, and hopefully you'll find it useful in the coming month in between webinars. Take good care. Thank you.
Thank you.